I'll start with some facts about climate change which you all know about, but just to give a background of why we are discussing these things. Then we'll talk about the contrarian views about what we call those who are scaremongers and those who are too optimists. We'll talk about how economics influences the policy decisions, and we'll also talk about some of the international agreements that have failed and that have succeeded, and what are the obstacles. And in this context, I will try to end with some of the policies that India has taken over the years, and what India can do for the coming Paris Convention of Parties, that is the COP20. Now there are three specific facts that we all agree about, that greenhouse effect is produced by some gases and water vapor in the atmosphere, and increased stock of the greenhouse gases would increase average temperature of the earth, and human activities, especially after the industrial revolution and after the development process has really accelerated, has increased the concentration of greenhouse gases and the emission of greenhouse gases every year in the atmosphere, so that a major part of temperature rise and associated climate change can be related. I will not comment about how strong the relationship is, how causal it is, or how one can have one-to-one correspondence between them, but it can lead to climate change. But what are the disputes then? These disputes mainly are about, as I just said, the strength of the position of the relationship between human activities, especially industrial activities and what we call developmental activities, and the climate change or the rate of climate change. So the magnitude of temperature increase is disputed. The speed of temperature increase is also something which people have not agreed upon. The impact of what this temperature increase will have on various environmental attributes, that is also disputed. For example, Professor Ganguly was talking about the other day about how we initially thought that Himalayan glaciers would just melt off, but how over the last few years we have had a contrarian scientific evidence about that. So there are disputes about what the temperature increase will do to our Earth. And then the link between greenhouse gas emission and temperature increase, the link between production, consumption and greenhouse gas emission, and at the end we have the question of equity, that who is responsible for what part of the problem, and so who has the right to continue doing what they are doing and who have to stop. So these are the issues that are forcing all these problems in the international conventions and international conferences, policies that are to be internationally enforceable, face a roadblock here in terms of being unanimous. Now, the economics and of course the politics of climate change mitigation centers around these disputes, while the skeptics downplay the risks, stress on the uncertainties of what would happen if human activities continue at the pace at which it is continuing now, and the future course of action. The alarmists, on the other hand, concentrate on the risks, the associated impacts, and the intergenerational equity. That is, we have to bequeath to our children not a better environment, but at least the environment that we started with. We cannot give them a worse off condition to start with. On the other hand, it is also true that mitigation is costly and benefits cannot cover the opportunity costs for many of the developing countries, especially for those developing countries who are really at the bottom of the pyramid and who are not that much vulnerable, as science tells them now, towards this environmental impacts. So just as these policymakers in these countries face a dilemma about where to spend the next rupee. I mean, they would spend it where the highest returns come from, and for them sometimes it is a choice between providing a square meal to a large part of their population or spending in some environmental mitigation policies or steps, and obviously they are inclined towards choosing the former. What has been the general economics of the policies and agreements that have been taken so far. The policy instruments, the first of the policy instruments that were used are tradable pollution permits. Like say, in a locality, you want so much of effluent or emission to come up. And now there are 3-4 industries, and you say that okay, this is the total limit, so I divide it by 4. So each of you get 1/4 of the total emission that is allowed in this place, and so you are given a sort of license, a permit. So emit this much amount. So these permits or licenses, which are called tradable pollution permits, are tradable. Usually they are exchangeable against fees or something else. Now one particular industry may find that it needs to increase its production, or maybe its production activity or production technique is not that much efficient. So it needs to emit more or pollute more to meet its production targets. At the same time, some other industry may be more energy efficient, more technically advanced, or its production level may be such that it does not need all of its pollution permits. So what they can do is mutually exchange that pollution permit or trade in exchange of certain fees. So what happens is that these pollution permits are tradable. Someone can buy, someone can sell, depending on their own situation, but the total pollution level in the locality remains the same. So these are based on physical targets and quotas. The abatement takes place irrespective of costs and benefits because it is fixed at the level pre-decided. But there are uncertainties regarding the costs and the benefits makes it inefficient. Like, what is the cost at which this pollution control each of these industries have to take on? Is it justifiable in terms of their marginal cost in terms of production? Is it justifiable or optimum in terms of the social marginal cost that they face? So these issues are not taken into consideration, the quota is imposed from above, and so it becomes economically inefficient. Of course, domestically, for many of the developing countries, it is very difficult to enforce. For globally, it is also difficult to enforce because of lack of checks and balances, lack of, I would say, legal framework to enforce them globally. And in large countries like India, it is also difficult to enforce because of potential conflict with public sentiment, potential conflict with the production needs of various unorganized small industries, and where it is also not possible for the government to enforce it and to check whether these are actually taking place. For example, I would say that, like I was telling the other day, that in the place where we grew up and went to school, many industries have come up since 2000. So what has happened is that these industries are supposed to have something of a pollution control machinery, equipment installed in their chimneys, that's the smokestacks. But what they do is that since these are costly to run and guzzle a lot of electricity, they turn it off during night. And it is very difficult for the government agencies or the people who are supposed to check them or regulate them to inspect them at night arbitrarily because they are scattered, lack of manpower and all those problems. So what happens is that pollution continues. But surprisingly, this was the mainstay of Kyoto Protocol, that countries will be given some sort of a quota to pollute and they can then mutually exchange. The second policy instrument is that of carbon tax, that is tax on emission of each unit of CO2 equivalent. Tax is all commodities that emits carbon. It is easy to enforce because it is something like an indirect tax. But the problem here is it is difficult to arrive at the tax rate, the rate at which it is to be taxed, the rate at which CO2 equivalent is to be priced. What is the price of sort of 1 ton equivalent of CO2? It also is a high cost to producers. So politically unviable domestic policy because it increases cost of almost everything. People recently have started talking about hybrid policies, where there are perpetual quotas being distributed, but then there are again short-term annual permits that are to be sold at market prices. Like so, you have a quota, you don't have to purchase tradable pollution permit from other surplus entities, surplus countries or industries. What you can do is that you can purchase it from the national government or some agency at market prices. So it becomes a flexible system in a sense that there is no upper limit to the pollution level that can happen. And again, only the marginal emissions are taxed, but then it becomes that no incentive is there to reduce pollution, as long as profits is greater than the permit prices. Like if you,
it's a quota on what?
it's a quota of how much you can pollute, right? How much emission you can have from your industry or the country as well. So now what happens is that if you find that production of one additional unit of your commodity will give you a profit which is higher than what you have to pay for purchasing the pollution permit for that additional production, you go on with it. So there is no upper bound to that, to the pollution level that may happen in that level. Now, why the Kyoto Protocol failed? For that background, you have to look at something at the regional disparity of between the countries. So you see, this is somewhere around where the industrial revolution in the West started, right? So you find that from that phase onwards, there was a huge divergence between real per capita income at purchasing power per US dollar between the developed and the developing countries, and especially between the most developed and the least developed countries. Now, this is crux of understanding why the developing countries really talk about that, okay, the growth or the progress that you have had over this last 150 odd years is what is at the cost of the environment. So now you cannot ask us to remain at the bottom and take up policies that will hinder our progress to a level similar to yours. So understanding these divergence is the key to understanding the difference of opinion between these countries. You are aware of this graph, I think. That is the disparity between the billion tons of CO2 emissions, where the developing countries have just now started to go above the developed countries. By the way, I think you are familiar with the so-called Annex 1 countries and non-Annex 1 countries. If you are not, in Kyoto Protocol, all countries were divided into two groups. The Annex 1 countries, which are mostly the developed and the Western countries, who have obligatory and enforceable emission cuts to be made over a period of years. This they can do by physically bringing down the emissions in their own countries. They can also do that by investing, by helping other countries, both Annex 1 and not Annex 1 countries, to bring down emissions from their countries. They can also do by purchasing quotas or permits from other countries. The remaining countries were the non-Annex 1 countries who were not forced to have a certain emission cuts, but who had to pledge their voluntary roadmap to bring down emissions. Like India, China, these are all non-Annex 1 countries, US, UK, these are Annex 1 countries. But the problem with Kyoto Protocol over time is that after being agreed upon, it had to be ratified by the domestic legislation, whichever that it is. The two largest Annex 1 emitters did not ratify it in their own legislation, that is, US has not ratified Kyoto Protocol or the emission cuts, so you cannot hold them up for not doing what they are supposed to do. Similarly, Russia has gone out of that. China is a big emitter, India is a big emitter, but they are not Annex 1 countries, so there is no binding on them to bring down emission to a certain level.
I have a question.
Yes.
So I'm assuming that the emissions measurements are based on where the emissions come from by country, but are there any ways to measure emissions by corporations that are located in a certain company or headquartered in a certain company and redistribute?
That is another thing which has been taken up in recent times, like one, the carbon footprint of consumption, the other, the carbon footprint of business, which are being nowadays and come to that. These emissions relate to the physical locations of the organization, not where they are headquartered or what is the origin of those countries. Right. Like, this is a good question, because what has happened in recent times is that people are talking about carbon footprints of consumption. That okay, we should measure the carbon footprint in terms of the total consumption that is taking place in the country. For example, a country can bring down its emission by importing majority of its products from outside. So the production takes place somewhere else, the emission is accounted for by some other country. So we are keeping green in terms of our production processes. But our consumption process, if you look at that, that has a huge carbon footprint. So this is one issue which has been taken up especially by developing countries nowadays, which is also called so-called export of dirty industries. That we shift out industries that are potentially emitting to other countries but continue to consume products from those industries. So while total emission from the non-Annex 1 countries have increased, the per capita emission has still remained lower than the Annex 1 countries. So this is what the developing countries, including the South Asian countries, are playing at. That okay, you see, we are still at per capita terms, we are still at a much lower level. So you have to allow us to come up or bring down your own per capita emission level before we can talk of any international agreement. So just as I said, the Kyoto Protocol depended on targets and timetables, tradable permits within Annex 1 countries, joint implementation within Annex 1 countries, and clean development mechanism where Annex 1 countries do invest or provide some financial help to have some clean development project, mitigation projects in non-Annex 1 countries and claim carbon credits for that. So these were the mainstays of Kyoto Protocol, where Annex 1 countries or the developed countries, I would say, have to bring down the emission levels. They can do so by, again, physically bringing down emission level, by investing in some projects which brings down emission level in some non-Annex 1 countries, which we call clean development mechanism, and tradable permits with other Annex 1 countries. After that, we had we have something like conference of parties where governments from all countries come together to really follow up on the objectives and targets which were earlier framed under the protocol. So once a protocol is done with, every year or every autumn year, they have this conference of parties where governments come together and try to agree upon what are the steps to be taken by each of the respective governments or respective countries to really achieve the goals and targets that were agreed upon in the protocol. So I will talk about the post-Kyoto Protocol, most of the COPs. In Bali, during the 13th COP, there was an ad hoc working group to bring down for cooperation, and agreement was there, which talked about shared vision, mitigation, adaptation, technology and financing. So these are the major issues that have to be taken up by countries for succeeding and for bringing down emissions to the levels as decided in the Kyoto Protocol. In the 15th COP in Copenhagen, it was decided that the long-term goal of limiting temperature increase to below 2 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels, and the review has to be done in 2050, that is this year, for the next round of protocol, which is to be enforceable from 2020. It was also decided that developed countries would provide $30 billion during 2010 to 12 and mobilize about 100 billion per year from 2020 onwards for the developing countries to bring in technology for mitigation. During
Rajesh,
yes.
this is a question.
Did
a report come out last week though that says that the 2-degree agreement is not on track right now, and that they're going to have to. There was a report by the ICA that said that it's not the path on right now is not going to
Yes, I mean
suffice.
it is agreed upon that we would walk towards that, but whatever work is being done, I would say is not sufficient enough to keep to that path.
One quick question, since we have an interruption. Do all of you guys have a copy of the slides that Rajesh is presenting? So the slides and what he is presenting, I think, will be very important for your second working.
I will share them to flash drive. I will share them today with the flash drive.
I think there are a few other background papers also. It would be better that they take the current version.
Okay.
The whole folder from
The entire folder.
Yes.
So was the U.S. not involved in these meetings?
Yes, US was involved.
Yes, it will be.
These are conference of parties is for all the countries across the globe.
So, but it's not directly related to the Kyoto Protocol?
Yes, it is also related to the Kyoto Protocol, but what I wanted to point out is that it is not domestically ratified by the US legislation. So you cannot hold US why did you not do this? They would say that it is not ratified in our country. It is not enforceable there.
So, but the part about developed countries contributing 30 billion or whatever, is the U.S. a part of that?
No, US is part of that.
So US did not say that we will follow this protocol.
No, US did not say that we will follow this path of bringing down emissions.
Bring down emissions.
Whatever we are doing is voluntary.
Right. We will not follow this exact ground rule.
I just want to say it's confusing for a reason. The U.S. is putting in effort, but they're not actually making the commitments on a domestic level, if anyone's still confused. But, yeah.
I have a question as for the permits as a financial tool. Does the value of a permit change, and are the permits something that is charged like on an annual basis, or is it just something you can purchase and hold on to?
It is something like all the tradable permits are on an annual basis. That like this is the amount of emission that you can do per year. So once you have something like that for this year you have this much amount that you can emit.
Okay. And then my other question is that price, has that price been fixed historically? Is it sort of stayed around the same amount?
No, it is market determined. It is flexible.
One comment that I wanted to ask to Mr. Ram is there was a Nature commentary article regarding 2 degrees centigrade, where this 2 degrees centigrade threshold is not working in the, and they had a very good opinion about it, why it is not working, why there should be no newer approach to that. So they shared that article with the group.
Yes.
It was published in Nature this year.
I know which article you're talking about.
Yeah.
So I would strongly suggest though that some of you have a little bit, more understanding of these protocols, what happens and why. So then read those papers, but if you don't, then start from, from scratch. So start first by reading what Rajesh has here and understanding these. Also remember the timelines, right? I mean, US itself is not one entity, so the Kyoto Protocol was when? 97, right? So that was
95 to 97.
Different era when this was not signed. This is a different era. However, the US, like any other country, once it signs an international treaty, successive governments at least to some extent bound to that, right? Unless they say, no, we want to change something. So yes, I mean, the USA has not signed has not ratified the protocol. So that's interesting in terms of how much leverage the US has or does not have, etc.
Okay. So by 2010, when they reached Durban, they were already talking about the second commitment period of Kyoto Protocol, that is the 2015 to 2020 period, next 5-year period.
Just one, so here, which flash drive do you have?
I have this hideout one.
speak up.
Oh, so the one that's being passed around is the copy of the PowerPoints of the war games from last year.
The other flash drive where you have Rajeshri's slides and all these papers, the latest version, that will be faster, right? There's this.
Yeah.
Okay, so by the time we came to Durban in 2010, we are already talking about the second commitment period of the Kyoto Protocol, that is the 2015 to 2020 period. It was decided that a new platform will be launched to deliver a new and universal greenhouse gas reduction protocol. And they were talking of legal enforceability of this protocol by 2015 for the period beyond 2020. And I think that is one of the mainstay of the COP that is to come up in Paris in December this year. So that is again for the warning purpose. Please keep it in mind that there are now talks of this protocol of 2020 and beyond to be legally enforceable across the globe and how countries react to that. They had also talked of concluding existing broad-based stream of negotiations, but by 2012. Unfortunately, in 2015, still it has not happened. There is still not convergence of ideas and proposals. It was also talked of that they would conduct a fresh global review of the emerging climate challenge based on the available science and data. This is one thing where relatively progress has been made, because over the last 3 years, both under the UN FCC and the IPCC, the science of climate change and how climate change is going to affect both the geography and the economy around the globe has taken a much broader leap. The point is, what I want to make is, most of these promises that the government made in these COPs and the objectives of the Kyoto Protocol are ethically very good, they sound good on paper. But what is happening across the globe in terms of the reality and in terms of many of the economic processes is not what is the optimal path to reach those goals. Just as I said, that we are not even halfway towards the path of sticking to the 2 degrees centigrade level. So why is it not happening that way? If we now go into the economics why Kyoto failed, is that first it is the policy is domestically unviable. In isolation, when they are collective, all countries may agree that okay, the globe is going this way, so we have to do something. In isolation, when they come back to their own domestic set of policies, they face a lot of resistance from diverse groups. And the question that is common is that if we do XYZ, is it guaranteed that all other countries will follow suit? And so we will have a global optimum. So the policymakers have to say that no. It is quite possible that we restrict our emissions, but globally no other countries do that. And so what happens is that both environmentally we are worse off, because our own reduction does not help in bringing down global emission much, and at the same time we are economically worse off because we are the only country who have taken to these mitigation procedures and policies. So once these sort of things happen, it is very problematic and difficult for domestically to bring down emission and to take hard mitigation measures. As I said, major emitters had non-ratified this, making it not domestically enforceable. The other issue is certification of CDM. Now this clean development mechanism, I have tried to elaborate a bit. Like this is something of a project which is physically taken up in a non-Annex 1, that is a developing country, which is supposed to bring about a reduction in carbon emissions. Now suppose the project cost is some amount, and a part of that is financed by an Annex 1 country, then that Annex 1 country can claim credit for that project in proportion to the finance that they have made. Now how the process works? The process works in the sense like you have a plantation over here, a certain plantation project that is taken up, and that is scientifically to be allotted certain carbon credits. A part of that is financed by, say, UK. So half of that credit is to be claimed by you. Now, who certifies that a plantation has been taken up, and what is the quantum of carbon credit that is to be allotted to that? It is the local officials who have to certify that, okay, CDM has been taken up in this and this area, which is going to have this credit. Now, it is mutually beneficial to both the Annex 1 country and the non-Annex 1 country to sort of just fudge data and say that, okay, this has been done. How the Annex 1 country gains? It gains by way of carbon credit. How does the Annex 2 country gain? The Annex 2 country gains in terms of foreign money, capital coming in. So it is mutually beneficial for both of them to not do sufficiently enough, but to certify that certain CDMs have taken place. In fact, about 35 to 40% of all CDM projects that were taken up during the period 2005 to 2010 were found to be sort of questionable in all developing countries. Then there is a link between the funding and bilateral issues, like which countries will actually finance the CDM in particular developing country would depend on the bilateral relationship between the developed country that is to finance and the developing country where it is going to take place. Transfer of resources. Like the amount of money that is lying with the Green Fund for CDM, for investing in CDM across developing countries is about 8 times of the total annual global inflow of institutional investment and portfolio investment from developed countries to developing countries. Now, if such a huge transfer of resources, international transfer of resources are to take place, it would have significant impact, in fact, impact unseen, unheard of, in terms of its impact on interest rates and in terms of its impact on exchange rates. So this has huge significance for global business as well. As a result, it will have impact on BOP in terms of trade and exchange rates. And there are issues like poor monitoring, slack enforcement, and very small private incentives to bring about all those policies that were agreed upon in Kyoto. What are the key issues then? The key issues are the marginal abatement costs are higher in developing countries, while marginal benefits are uncertain. As I said, developing countries always think of like a bird in hand is worth 2 in the bush. So we have something like $100 of or $100,000 of investable money. What do we do with that? If we develop a dam, or if we develop an infrastructure project, if we invest it in irrigation, we have probably much certain output from that, much certain returns from that. Whereas if we spend it on the mitigation measures, the benefits that I would have is something in the nature of losses that were avoided. Now the losses that are avoided are, one, in the future. Second, the quantum of losses are uncertain. Third, whether the losses will actually take place or not and who will be affected by that is uncertain. So they prefer investing in their development processes rather than in abatement. Then the inequality of stock and flow mechanisms, like as I said, that whoever is responsible for the stock of carbon out there, and then we are talking of equality about the flow each year in per capita terms. Of course, in terms of developing countries, the marginal utility of GDP is much higher in developing countries. So when the IPCC talks of 21% of GDP would be spent for mitigation and adaptation measures, whereas the losses which would be avoided would be in the range of 5 to 8% of GDP. So it is economically viable and economically optimum to spend for mitigation. They forget that in terms of low purchasing power parity per capita income in developing countries, that 1% of GDP has much higher value compared to the global average of that 1% of GDP.
So even though the GDP is much
lower, it's still 1% has more purchasing power, is that what you mean?
No, that 1% has, in terms of economics, has more utility to them because of their lower average income which they start with. Like when you're poor, additional 1 rupee has much more value to them, value to you, rather than when you are rich. Okay. Then domestic inequalities complicate the matters further. Like when you talk of average GDP of India, we tend to forget that, okay, about 60% of the people have about 1/4 of that average per capita income, whereas the top 20% have about 5 times of that. So again, those who are poor would want to have a better life, higher income, rather than go for mitigation, whereas maybe the rich or maybe who are at the top of the pyramid would be more interested in mitigation measures. Market-based instruments are misused in developing countries because of lack of enforcement and lack of institutional framework. Also, they see mitigation as opportunity cost, and the net benefit that Kyoto talks of and IPCC talks of depends on the discount rate. That is, at what rate we discount the future values of the losses. I'd like to give a background or to start with. IPCC talks of, or even UNFCCC talks of that, okay, if we continue in the way we are going, the global temperature will increase, there will be massive changes in climate, leading to a reduction of about 5 to 8% of GDP potentially in the, say, 100 years from now. Now, to avoid some losses to take place 100 years from now, what is the amount of money to be invested? Now, if the amount of money to be invested is greater than, I would call it the net present value of the future losses, then it is no way we would invest. If the investable amount is less than the net present value of the future losses, we would invest. Now, what the net present value today would be of the future losses depends on the rate at which we value time, which we call in economics the discount rate. Now, this discount rate, when calculations are being made, are not observable from the market. It is arbitrarily taken in terms of averages, across current interest rates, in terms of averages across countries. So once B is not market based and there is no objectivity behind what discount rate we are taking, it determines the decision making. So social situations like inequalities, relative and absolute deprivations, basic needs, whether those damages are reversible or irreversible, will all determine the actual discount rate. So this discount rate is something which has been sort of debated over. If you have a high discount rate, then your future losses will be underestimated and you would rather go for the present process rather than invest in mitigation. If the discount rate is taken to be very low, then the net present value of the future losses would be overestimated and you would go for mitigation rather than continuing the process. So everything depends on what discount rate you have been taking, and this is disputed. So then what are the market-based instruments that are being talked of at present for the next 5 years or for the 2020 agreements? We are talking of cap and trade mechanism, cap on total emissions permits, which has been the mainstay of Kyoto Protocol. Then now we should be talking of the permits to be auctioned, right? The highest payer should be given the permit. But in reality, they are basically allocated in terms of historical pollutions. Like take the cement industry. Historically, technically, it is one of the highest polluters. So cement industry is provided a larger pollution permits. Like since you have been a bad boy, you have given more freedom to be a bad boy in future also. So something like that grandfathering attitude is taken. So this is another major issue that so what happens in reality now that the rich buys the right to pollute beyond cap. If you have money, you buy the permits. But where do the surplus arise from? Where do the polluters beyond the limit purchase their permits from? Creation of new permits like renewable energy corporations, clean development mechanism that give rise to additional quotas. Declined economic production like informal CIS countries and in Russia during the late 90s and 2000. There was a huge drop in production, so there was a huge surplus of tradable pollution permits which could have been sold to the Western countries. Excess allocation. For example, as I said, of the cement industry. Likewise, in EU, most of the countries had excess allocation to begin with. So they had certain excess or surplus pollution permits. Sometimes caps are increased as special mechanisms are derived from representation from different countries, different industry lobbies to increase the caps. So as a result of which what has happened that actual emission has not been affected much by Kyoto Protocol. To sum up about the problems, CDM, REC and the corruption issue, just as I said, statistics is fudged and about 40% of the CDM projects are questionable. Lobbying and excess fee allocation, as in the case of EU. Transfer of economic benefits to global north because they have the power and the purchasing power to buy tradable permits from the erstwhile Soviet Union countries. Foreign exchange benefits override the optimal economic strategies in developing countries where they go for CDM for earning the foreign exchange, earning foreign capital without looking at whether that project is economically viable. Like, I don't know whether in Bangalore you had come across the wind power plants or solar power plants, like solar energy parks. Now there are instances where solar energy parks have been established on agricultural farms and land was acquisition not only through market-based policies but also through muscle power, money power, etc. and political power. Now what was not asked for is that whether that solar energy park is actually providing more returns to the economy rather than the agricultural production that is being lost. It is only because solar energy has higher prices from the grid that producers want to put up a solar energy park and be assured of getting huge profit. That's the benefit to the project. This is also related to the second last point, that is displacement and disempowerment, especially with the renewable energy development mechanism. And it also sometimes encourages cosmetic technical changes which does nothing to actually give rise to lower emissions rather than just claim credits for that. Yes?
I have a question. So, in the context of developing or emerging nations, we have seen this debate about, or this perception at least, and potentially the truth, that people talk about climate change and climate change impacting developing nations, and within developing nations, the underdeveloped strata more. Yet, all these treaties, sometimes what they seem to be doing from the perception of these developing nations at least, is moving the economic benefits to the, what you call, global north, or the more developed nations, right? So there is that perception at least in developing. In places like the US, which is probably the only place where there is a lot of debates, and where there are a lot of debates about, whether climate change is a science, established science, and all kinds of things like that. There are, a lot of these debates are ultimately driven by the economy. And there's a feeling that it's socialists taking over. That's the perception, right? So it seems that everybody, the extreme right in the US, who one could argue only care about the top few percent in the US, which is obviously a developed nation, and people in, let's say, India or elsewhere, right, who care about developing nations, all of them feel that all these climate treaties, climate policies are benefiting the other, and it's a big conspiracy against it. And this perception, at least, is a fact. Joyce Roy was telling us that she used to face this situation that if she or anybody else, if they said that yes, something should be done, you know, some, negotiators from India would say, are you really representing India? What are you doing, right? So it's almost become a loss-loss kind of proposition where everybody is thinking that the other person is winning and it's a big conspiracy. Why is this happening? I mean, why is this happening, and what are the issues? What can be done to change this? This cannot be this is worse than zero-sum game, right? This is a loss-loss game. How can that happen? I mean, how could that perception have happened, and what can be changed?
That brings us back to something like the prisoner's dilemma game, which is generally used in environmental statecraft, like what would the policy be actually leading to, where it would be mutually beneficial to have another equilibrium where both parties gain. We seem to arrive at equilibrium where both parties lose. But you see, why the prisoner's dilemma game is used extensively, one of the major assumption of the prisoner's dilemma game is that there is no dialogue.
I don't think, how many of you know about the prisoner's dilemma game? So maybe a little bit of background, or I don't know how much.
Okay. It is something like, see, there were two partners in a crime. Both of them are taken in and they are put in separate cells in the police station. And the police goes to one of them and says that, okay, you see, if the other one approves of the crime and you do not, you face 15 years while he goes scot-free. But if you agree to it and he also agrees to it, then you would go something like 5 years each. It goes to the other cell, tells the same to the other person. So now what the prisoners face? They face a dilemma. That if they do not approve of the crime while the other person does, then he will go scot-free while he will be facing 15 years. But in reality, if both of them do not approve of the crime, there is no sort of proof against them, both of them would go scot-free. But something like what happens is that since they are not communicating with each other and they do not know what the other is doing, both of them approve and both of them are sort of put in a 15 years each. So this is what leads to whether they could have been, if they had been having a dialogue between them, they could have decided that okay, both of us are not going to approve, so both of us are going to go scot-free or face a say, smaller sentence for a petty crime. They face a longer sentence. So this is the crux of the prisoner dilemma game, where a win-win situation is available, but what actually happens is that they have a lose-lose situation. But again, the assumption in prisoner's dilemma game is that...
just before you go to the assumption, let's see, pick some volunteer. Anybody want to explain what, anybody who had not heard about prisoner's dilemma game before, want to explain now what you understood from this? I don't know. I'll pick somebody. Adrian?
Well, we're still asking what kind of...
Yeah, what did you get from what Rajesh just explained about the prisoner's dilemma game?
Well, it's kind of, I like the...
By the way, just before you proceed, you guys know about games and their uses in economics and things like that, right? So these are games are, these are called games, but these are not necessarily, just fun and games. These have specific uses in economics and social sciences, etc.
Like these are something like the war games where you have strategies being played out. Like you have parties and you are asked to strategize and you are given outcomes for each of the strategies.
So Adrian, what did you understand, and then Lindsay, what did you understand?
Well, I like the beginning of the story, how like the prisoners have more of a choice in deciding like how like the consequences like. So like I think I remember you saying if one agrees, then they will go. If one agrees and the other one disagrees, one will go scot-free and the other one has to serve a certain period of time. And then the other way around is if they both agree to serve to such an extent that they both serve a shorter time. And I found that interesting, like how like a specific choices that you make with a different group and within a group, like it can make a. I'm not sure how to describe it. Actually, when you were saying that, I was thinking about a TV show, actually, where it was, what was the TV show? I think it was Orange is the New Black, where they had to, wait, what? You were saying something? Yeah, what? Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, it was kind of a similar event like that, where if they both decided to go around to go for the same plan, and they would both have a shorter time. But then one decided to do something that the other one did not expect, and that person got free, and the other person was stuck in jail for a longer period of time. So when you said that, that's like the first thing that came to my head.
Lindsay, you want to speak?
I'm sorry, I can't hear what people are saying.
No, so forget about what he said, but can you explain what you understood from what he explained about the prisoner's dilemma again? I mean, are you comfortable explaining?
No, I'm not. I'm sorry.
Anybody else who is comfortable explaining? Okay, if you could. Okay,
I mean, I thought it was explained, but
huh?
I think it's been fully explained.
I cannot.
I think it's been fully explained.
But you cannot explain. So
I mean, I can explain, but
okay, so I mean, if you'd like to explain, I'd like
okay,
to
so
explain in
my own
language
words
that everybody can understand.
So, do you think drawing this 2x2 matrix will help in understanding everybody?
Yes.
Could be, but I mean, Alina, why don't
Yeah,
you?
we did.
Why don't
I think we
you-
did it.
Huh?
I think everyone pretty much did it. We did a good job.
No, it's not. I mean, I know he did a good job. I'm trying to understand if all of us got it now.
Yeah.
It is slightly different.
Draw that,
Anyone of you would like to go and explain to the class?
Is this like game theory?
It is game theory. It is one of the starting points of game theory. Any one of you would like to go and explain to the class while Rajeshri has tea? Please, I mean, any one of you would like to go and explain to the class, and you can ask your friend to help. Please go ahead. Step up. Take the.
No.
Don't be shy, guys. Anyway, fine, go ahead.
We have two players who are equally, who did equal wrong, but they do not communicate with each other. So if we made a graph, we would have 4 points and 4 possible outcomes. For example, if we go to one player and tell the player that, okay, if you give up the second player, he will get 15 years, but you will get nothing. So they are most likely to do so because they do not know what the other player might do. So because of the fact that they do not have any communication with each other, it is less likely that they will negotiate with each other. But if they did the negotiation, the outcome would be better because instead of 15 years, they would get 1.5 years, right? And if none of them give put blame on the other one, both of them would get 0 years. They would not get any anything, but they will not do so because of the fact that they do not communicate with each other. They do not think that the other one might not do that. So basically what happens is that because of the miscommunication, they both think bad things of each other and they both blame each other and they both get very bad outcome because of this, if it makes sense.
Thurston, would you want to add anything?
Not necessarily. I mean, I think that was a good explanation. That basically it's the lack of communication combined with the lack of trust that usually does it. And I think there are even game shows, not just TV shows, but game shows. A game show that was based on it. I don't remember.
Golden balls.
Or something. I just remember there was a game show where there were 2 contestants and they played together as a team the entire game. And at the very end of the game, they said, okay, they took each player aside individually and said, okay, so this is the prize money. And you can either choose one option, and if your partner chooses that same option, then you both split the earnings. Or you can choose the other option, and if your partner chooses the first option where they plan to split, you actually steal the entire earnings and they get nothing.
But if you both decide to steal, then you both get nothing. So there was like a whole game show based off of that. They win all of this money, and then they are allowed to communicate. Was the twist on this? They are allowed to communicate beforehand, and they said, you know, all right, I'm going to steal. Like I'm going to split, and they always promise each other they're going to split, and at the end, one person steals, and then they take all the money. And I remember that one guy actually countered this, and what he did was he promised the other guy the entire time, I'm going to steal, I'm going to steal, I'm telling you I'm going to steal. And the other guy pleaded with him well, not hours, but like minutes, just like pleading with him, like, no, split, I'm going to steal. Promised him he was going to steal the entire time. And the guy got so frustrated, and then he finally gave up. So, you know, he chose split. The guy who promised he was going to steal also chose to split. And then they both got to split the earnings evenly. But other than that, usually what happens is both sides promise to split, but it's a lack of trust, not just a lack of communication, that causes one person to steal or both to steal, and then it's a lose-lose.
Elisa?
But also, like, I was a research participant for somebody who was studying game theory in high school, and I did it with all my friends who I trusted completely, but what tended to show in the research was that people sometimes choose the most selfish option way out, so even if you do trust the people, you will still try to keep stealing, so that's also like another interesting thing about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody else want to add anything? Yes?
In like freshman year of high school, in my history class, my teacher would play this game with like every single class she had ever had. And I don't remember what the specifics of it were, but basically, if we all agreed to like the non-selfish option, we would have gotten like 5 extra bonus points on something, or like it was something like really significant amount of bonus points on an exam. And like we all discussed it every time. We're like, we're gonna do it. And then every single time she ever played the game, like no one ever split it, and people always picked the selfish option, which meant nobody got anything. Like even the person who picked the selfish option didn't get anything. And I don't remember what the specifics were, but it was just really interesting because in her like entire like 20 years of teaching, she had played this game with so many different classes, and not once did people like cooperate and like go for the benefit of the whole group.
I just find like how like all this is really interesting in the context of like climate change and these like agreements.
Speak up a little.
Like in the context of climate change agreements, how all this is really interesting, especially with stuff like air pollution. It can be so like, you know, tangible but yet abstract in terms of it's such a global like issue and different regions can affect each other. And so it's just like if you have distrust or saying, okay, well their air pollution issues are way larger than ours, so why should I be the selfish one when I don't trust them that they should do stuff first? And then instead of people being selfish on both sides, even though everybody needs to do a better job.
And remember here that selfishness is also tempered with what you could call nationalism or pseudo-nationalism. It's not just selfish for me, it's selfish for this thing. Joyce, you want to add something?
I was just going to say it's really easy to see if you just draw a picture. Because like all this explaining is really...
You want to go ahead? You want to go ahead, Joyce?
I could do that.
Why
I think, but it might be wrong.
You want to say something?
Yeah, well, I mean, I saw an example of this in a movie, A Beautiful Mind, in which like John Nash like lays the foundation of game theory with like an example.
Yeah.
So nobody's talking here about the Nash equilibrium.
No. He says a similar thing, like when everyone in a group tries to like...
For you and for the group. So here everything was good for me. That's why the outcome is different here.
Did you have something to say? Bernie?
Yeah.
Why don't you draw the picture yourself?
I thought it was kind of like, it reminded me of the Batman movie where like there's the 2 boats. I don't really remember it that well, but like there's like the 2 boats and they can each like have a button to like blow up the other boat, right?
Yeah.
And then what happens if they don't?
They both die.
Oh, they
will.
will.
Yeah.
There was like a boat of prisoners and then a boat of like civilians.
Yeah.
But the Joker has like the master of
Yeah, to blow them up. Yeah, that's what it reminded me of.
$5 years for both of them, 5 years each.
Yeah, 5 years each.
15 years of birth. 15 for 1, 15 for
0 and
15 for prisoner 1. And then 0. Other way around.
So like that's what you have to do.
And then what is it, 8 or something like that?
After in calculus, in AP Calc, after we took the exam, we spent the rest of the year on gate.
But I think